Now that we're done talking about the politics of Congress, let's talk about the state equivalent of Congress in Nevada, of course. That is the Nevada legislature. It's a bicameral institution composed of the state Senate and the state Assembly. With that being said, let's move on and get into some of the crucial details here. And in part, we'll be looking at this in comparison to the U.S. Congress. How is it similar? How is it different? So, as I had suggested, indeed, the Nevada legislature is like Congress in the sense that it is bicameral. We have an assembly that is akin to the House of Representatives and a Senate that is akin to the U.S. Senate, obviously. In each house, a limit of 12 years. Representatives can serve in each body for 12 years. The term of service in the assembly is 2 years, so you can do 6 2-year terms. Term of service in the Senate, 4 years, so you can do 3 4-year terms in the Senate. This legislative body meets for 120 days, so 4 months every 2 years. That makes it a part-time, essentially amateur legislature. It also meets additional times in between when called into emergency session by the governor. Again, Sandoval did this recently, I think back in January, when he called them into emergency session to approve the Tesla deal to get Tesla to build their battery manufacturing plant up north. The pay is decidedly minimal. I think it's something like $7,000 every 2 years with some per diem while you're meeting. So this raises questions, right? In part because we have a legislature that only meets once every 2 years. We do have a biennial budget. The second year of that biennial budget can get sketchy because you're having to make predictions about the future regarding revenue and spending. Those often prove to be a bit off, and that means that I think every year now for quite a long time, the governor has had to call the legislature into emergency session in the second year of a biennial budget in order to fix the budget. So at some point, right, are those really emergencies when they are predictable and every year? Maybe it's no longer an emergency. Maybe the legislature in Nevada should be full-time, more professional. Certainly in nearly every state of the union, it is a job that pays enough to actually make a living, and they meet much like the U.S. Congress on a relatively year-round basis with time off for the summer and Christmas and things like that. Um, so should Nevada move in that direction? I believe we, the people of Nevada, have rejected that at the polls in recent elections when it's been an initiative. So at this point, we're going to stick with what we have, but many have argued that, look, as we grow, as we become larger as a state, as we surpass 3 million people, we should think about becoming perhaps more professional and more full-time. That being said, Texas is a very big state, and they also have a part-time amateur legislature, and it seems to work well enough for them. So the debate goes on that issue. Alrighty, a few more bits and pieces, and we'll finish up pretty quickly here with the Nevada legislature. So we've seen, right, that in some ways the legislature here is similar to Congress. In some ways it's different. Different in that they have term limits. Members of Congress do not. Congress tried to create that possibility many years ago. The court struck it down as unconstitutional since it's not included in any Article 1 language about the U.S. Congress. But you can do it at state level, and I think nearly every state, like Nevada, has term limits for members of the state legislature. Similar in that sense, dissimilar, or different in that sense, sorry, dissimilar in that sense. Similar in the sense that it's bicameral, dissimilar in the sense that the Nevada Senate, 4-year terms, the U.S. Senate, of course, 6-year terms. But like with the House of Reps, the Assembly here, 2-year terms. So it's differences and similarities. Other things that we might talk about here. 2/3 majority in both houses to override a gubernatorial veto, just like with the U.S. Congress and the president. How often does this happen? Not very often. It happens more, I think, under weak governors, less under strong governors. So Governor Jim Gibbons from some years ago, a significant number of veto overrides. With Governor Sandoval, I'm not sure there have been any, if any at all, very few. Governor Sandoval clearly quite powerful, largely has his way on the budget, and we'll see that that's generally true for the budget process in Nevada. The legislature is at a disadvantage. They only meet once every 2 years for 4 months. The governor is working 24/7 pretty much year round. Gives him huge advantages on the budget process. Um, Two-thirds majority in both houses of the Nevada legislature in order to pass a tax increase. That was passed under Governor Gibbons. Seems to me like it's a ridiculous idea. Seems to me like it should be like with every other policy issue. It should be, I think, 50% plus one. It doesn't really establish any broad principle of democracy. It simply is an indication that, hey, we hate tax increases. Let's make it extra hard to pass them. I'm not sure that's a brilliant justification for this carve out on tax policy alone. Every other policy, 50% plus one. Tax increase, 2/3. So come on. But that's the way we've done it. And as we just saw in this recent legislative session, with a powerful governor, it can be done. It can be done. It requires bipartisanship. And as we noted, Governor Sandoval's roughly $1.1 billion tax increase over 2 years, it passed in 2/3 of both houses with a lot of Democratic support and significant Republican support, although the holdouts were indeed Republicans who are aggressively anti-tax. But Sandoval made it happen. That's pretty unusual. No line item veto for the governor in negotiating the budget. So that does give the legislature in Nevada a little extra oomph. I think in nearly every state of the union, the governor does have the line item veto, or they can eliminate certain provisions from the budget after the legislature has passed it. That's not the case in Nevada. It's either up or down on the entire budget, and that gives the legislature a little extra power here on the budget vis-a-vis the Nevada governor. Although, again, generally the governor still tends to dominate that process. If the governor here also had the line item veto, I think it would be almost total domination. This gives the legislature a better chance to influence more heavily the budget process. We might also make a final observation here. Over the years, thinking long term, the Nevada legislature has proven to be very party competitive. The mix of power is usually something close to 50-50. That's not the case right now, of course, right? Because of the 2014 election cycle, Republicans in Nevada control both houses of the legislature and the governor's office and all the other executive offices that are elected statewide. Six Republicans run the executive branch here in Nevada, including, of course, the governor, and the legislature is run by Republicans. Although we've also seen that in this case, right, Sandoval advanced what many saw as a relatively liberal agenda, raising taxes significantly to pay for public education K through 12, and he was able to win that by attracting both Republicans and Democrats. But ironically, he attracted more Democrats than Republicans. That was a counterintuitive choice by Sandoval. I think he wanted to establish a legacy for himself as being in some ways above party interests, trying to think in larger, broader terms here. But we would say that over the years, very party competitive, because in recent election cycles, the Democrats in Nevada have done quite well, partly because of the rising Latino population. Until quite recently, the Democrats controlled both chambers of the Nevada legislature by large margins. Again, that changed very dramatically in 2014. An unpopular president, fallout over the Affordable Care Act, midterm elections always go poorly for the president's party, right down to the state and local level. So Republicans kicked some butt in 2014 and turned things around at both the executive branch level and the legislative branch level. All right, that should do it. That concludes all the things that we need for exam number 2. Additional material that I post after this will be in a separate module, and that'll be for exam number 3, beginning with, I believe, the American presidency, moving on to the federal bureaucracy, moving on to the Nevada executive branch. That's next, but that will be a separate module, and that will be included in exam number 3, not the upcoming exam number 2.